Hey, Dr. Scott here, and welcome to Leading in 10, the live stream where we hope to help you amplify your impact in leading yourself and others in only 10 minutes. While most of us are familiar with the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, this principle can actually lead us astray in leadership. Many leaders unknowingly project their own preferences onto their teams. An extroverted leader might expect everyone to be vocal in meetings, while someone who thrives on public recognition might assume their entire team wants the same. A more effective approach is what's known as the platinum rule. Treat others as they want to be treated. This principle acknowledges that each person has unique preferences, communication styles, and motivations. True leadership means creating an environment that respects and responds to these individual differences. But this raises an important question. How can we understand how others prefer to be treated? One practical approach is the use of personal user manuals, which we'll explore today with our guest, Marija Hall from Momentous. Thanks for joining us, Marija.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So what exactly is a personal user manual and why are they useful?
Yeah, so personal user manuals are basically a guide for each individual team member to complete on how they prefer to be worked with, essentially. So what are the things or the conditions that a leader can set up to help the individual thrive in the workplace? And I think, Scott, they're particularly useful in this day and age when we've got, low engagement across the board in terms of workplaces, hybrid teams, lack of kind of teams coming together, understanding how best, particularly in an onboarding scenario, to work together. They're really helpful.
So what sort of preferences do you think this spans? I'm thinking like introversion, extroversion plays out. Can you give us some examples of how people like to be treated differently?
Yeah, so I guess it covers off on, your preferred communication and feedback style. And, I'm thinking of an example at the moment. Leaders sometimes default to, well, people love to be praised in public, but actually digging a little bit deeper using this as a tool, some people might really not benefit that and they might be appalled or shocked or, to receive public praise. So it kind of covers off on that as well. I think I've adjusted the model that I use as well. And I ask a question like, how can you tell if I'm stressed? So certain behaviors might be prevalent when people are, approaching a deadline. And so for their colleagues and the rest of the team to be aware of that is super helpful too.
So just coming back to that idea of people respond to reinforcement in different ways. I think there's a thing called reinforcement sensitivity. So some people, particularly extroverts, like positive praise. If you say something nice to them, they'll love it. If you say something negative, it's just water off a duck's back, whereas introverts tend to be the opposite. So if you say something positive, they'll just totally forget it. If you say something negative, they'll ruminate about it for a week. It's kind of, different people respond completely different to the same sorts of comments and praise. It's quite interesting,
Yeah, absolutely.
So shall we go through some of the questions that I know you like to ask?
Yeah, so these are just sort of a series of questions. So ideally what would happen is each team member would complete one of these, and obviously there needs to be an element of psychological safety for them to answer them, truthfully and really share. And then once they're completed, to share them with the team. And maybe you might pair some people up together or cover it off in a group. But the first question is sort of conditions I like to work in. So I work best when. Now, this is really different for lots of people. Some people love to have lots of planning and lots of notice about, different tasks. Others like to have not much structure and sort of fly by the seat of their pants in terms of day to day, or some people might work best under pressure and a deadline hanging over them. So that's the first one. And when you understand that as a leader, you'll know in terms of delegation who the best people are for certain tasks, for example. Other things like times now as I like to work. So particularly in a hybrid environment where there might be workplace flexibility and not everyone's starting and finishing at the same time, this is a really interesting question. So if I know that I do my best work early morning, maybe I'm not capable of doing really, really intense flow state, required deep work at 5 o'clock. But if someone's preferences is mismatched to mine, that's going to be a bit of a challenge for us both to have that, peak state to be able to perform. And then best ways to communicate. So I mentioned that one, whether it's sort of in person, email, instant message, that kind of thing. One of the ones that is really, I think, important to know as a leader when you're leading a team of people, the kind of feedback I need and how to deliver it.
Interesting. Yeah.
So we know the research says feedback needs to be timely, it needs to be specific, all of those things. Some people are really open to having feedback in a group setting, and others would just absolutely shut down and go within themselves if that happens. So that's also a key to understand as well. And then things like, what do I need support with? There might be certain situations or tasks or elements of the role that people might need help with, and that's important to know. We all obviously have different strengths and challenges as individuals. How I learn best is really interesting. Particularly, I think, when you think about organisational change in a context, maybe a new system is being introduced or there might be some other organisational change. Understanding how people learn is really important, particularly when you want to bring everyone on board and have them on the same bus for change. So someone might be really across detail, want to read all the paperwork and the policies and reams of information, whereas others actually learn best by, baptism of fire. They actually need to go through the process and learn, actually click the system or touch whatever it is that we're launching or developing to learn. So that is super interesting as well in terms of a leadership perspective. So structuring learning environments to meet your team members' needs is important. And then, things I struggle with is self-explanatory. This one I really like. It's about how to tell if I'm stressed, particularly when there is maybe an onboarding situation. There might be a new team member, or there might have been a restructure and bringing a group of people together that maybe haven't worked together for a long time. This is really important because what it enables is two things. The first one is self-awareness of the individual completing it. So for me, for an example, I might get really short and snappy when I'm on a deadline or if I'm getting stressed. I might be super laser focused and, working towards that deadline. And then maybe my conversations are shorter and I'm not really, how was your weekend? And, how was the play you went to see, etc. It might just be, let's get in and get it done. So that's a telltale sign for me to be aware of. But also if my colleagues know that, they might be able to check in with me and say, hey, Marija, I noticed you're a little bit short in our meeting today. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can help with? Or did you want to have a chat about something? That I think is a very, very helpful conversation for a team to have.
It's interesting, this process. I remember probably 15 years ago starting a new job as a corporate educator, and there was no onboarding, but I remember one of the co-facilitators sat down with me and he said, Scott, I just want to have a conversation with you about, what you like to do. Can you just tell me what you think your skills are, how you like to interact with other people? And we just mapped it out. And I remember that conversation 15 years later, just having that one conversation with this guy as an onboarding process was just really powerful for me to sit down and say, okay, that's pretty cool that somebody cares enough to ask, how do I like to be treated? And try to take that into consideration when he was delegating tasks and, when he should call me into a particular project, that sort of stuff. It was a really positive, as I said, I remember that 15 years later. It's quite a powerful tool. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also when we've got companies such as Atlassian who actually developed this concept, when they're using this, there's obviously quite a commercial case for it, right? So you're cutting down the onboarding process, you're fostering collaboration. You're actually also preventing some conflict too, because everyone's expectations are clear in terms of the rules of engagement with each other. So, which obviously leads to increased productivity. So, yeah, it's got lots of good applications.
So the other thing, you sent me a link of how Atlassian actually uses this, and they had some tips around technologies that they're using. They're using Trello, for instance, of having a different card for each person with their preferences. So having that central repository that everybody has access to. What sort of techniques would you suggest?
Yeah, so obviously in the tech sector, they are, living and breathing tech advancements and using technology. I've used this in, for instance, financial services settings. So we literally just had every team member's My User Manual in a central repository that was located online and had some other sort of teaming, team charter, team vision, all those value kind of statement documents that we had worked on. But then even when those leaders went away and did it with their own teams, they actually put them physically in the office for people to see as well when they were in. So around on people's desks, like on a wall sort of application, and then obviously shared it so that when new team members start, it actually cut down, the getting to know you phase, because you could quickly sort of pick up and go, oh, well, I need to interact with this person or collaborate. Here's a little bit about them. So I think, tech is great, but just as long as it's somewhere where it's either visually easy to access in the office or on someone's, filing system is really handy.
Oh, perfect. So if you could summarize the main points from this conversation, if you've got 3 top tips for people, what would they be?
So being a good leader is, as you said, understanding how other people like to operate. And I think creating an environment where people can thrive because their individual preferences are recognised. That's the first point. The second one would be, it's actually really a great way to foster collaboration when team members get together and learn more about each other and understand how they work. And the third one would probably be, these preferences also create a level of psychological safety and authenticity, being able to share. And particularly when we're thinking about diversity and neurodivergent individuals and, people with different abilities, I think this really levels the playing field and makes it okay that we all have different preferences and styles.
Perfect. And there we go. So how can they find out more about you or contact you is my last question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or momentous.com.au, or feel free to send an email at hello@momentous.com.au.
Perfect. And I can be found once again at scottbolland.com. Thank you so much once again, Marija.
Thanks, Scott. It's been a real pleasure.